feel any great regrets about my life. I feel like I've fulfilled myself. I've done what I wanted to do. I've been helpful to others. So, but there are a lot of patients who have build up regrets all the time. Sometimes I say to patients, I'm going to see you in a month from now. Let's see if you can make an experiment to try to build up no new regrets in this month. What would it be like to you? And try to see how they would live like that.
Knjige američkog psihijatra i pisca Irvina Jaloma otkrivaju vrsnog naučnika i autora koji eksperimentiše tehnikama pisanja. Rođen 1931. u Vašingtonu u porodici ruskih Jevreja, posle završenih studija medicine usavršava se na klinici John Hopkins, a karijeru započinje na Stenford Univerzitetu, na kome dobija katedru 1968. godine. Svoj uticaj na oblikovanje humanističkog i egzistencijalnog pristupa ljudskoj patnji i mentalnim poremećajima širio je intenzivnom psihijatrijskom praksom, književnim delima, ali i terapeutskim idejama antike, helenizma i moderne filozofije, o čemu svedoče i njegovi romani. Kad je Niče plakao, Lečenje Šopenhaeurom, Problem Spinoza. Nedavno se u Americi i kod nas pojavila Jalomova autobiografska proza, koja je, kako je najavio, njegova poslednja knjiga.
Irvin Yalom, it's great to meet you.
Thank you.
In Palo Altu at the moment when your new book is coming out. It's a special book of yours. It's your memoir.
Yes.
The title is Becoming Myself.
Yes.
And it sounds provocative, and it sounds a little bit like Marcus Aurelius' Meditations.
Well, there was a big fight about the title. I wanted another title. The publisher simply wouldn't have it. There's a very nice phrase from Nietzsche in Thus Spake Zarathustra, where he says, "Was that life? ? Well then, once again." And I really like that. It's the idea of Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, but, that he has really enjoyed this life to want to live it once again. So I wanted to put that in the title, and the publisher absolutely said no, it doesn't make any sense, it's too long, and so we struggled, and finally I came up with this one, which is really back to Nietzsche again, because he has this phrase, become who you are. So I played with that for a while, becoming who I am, and then finally becoming myself. So it's Nietzsche 2 or 3 times removed.
What do we need to become what we are? Do we have to create ourselves? Or do we have to accept ourselves first?
Well, I think both of those are good. Accepting yourself, creating yourself, and fulfilling yourself. Fulfilling all the potential that you have inside of you. So becoming who you are, I think, I like Nietzsche's language.
But at what moment of our lives do we become what we are? Are we changing the whole life, or
I think
there is a moment we could say?
I think we change our whole life. So maybe becoming who you are is maybe who you are just before death.
Yeah, you opened the book with the memories from your childhood.
Yes.
And you say it was mostly a happy childhood.
Well, my parents lived in a terrible neighborhood. It was dangerous out there. I didn't have many friends. I was the only white person in an all-black neighborhood in Washington. I was the only Jewish person in the whole area, in the whole school. So I didn't feel at home, didn't feel I fit. My parents working extremely hard. My mother really was not the most pleasant person in the world. So it was a very difficult childhood. But it dramatically changed when I was just about the age of 15. And we moved out of my parents kept the store they had, but we moved to live in another part of town, which is a much nicer part of town, and went to a school where there were lots of people like me, and I felt more at home. So I had a double childhood. It split in two until I was 15.
You write a lot about your mother, and you had a feeling she was hard to please, and that you didn't have a real contact with her. So
well, it wasn't a feeling. It was quite true that she was very hard to please. Yeah. Everybody agreed. Everybody who ever knew her agreed.
I wanted to be polite. Okay.
Agreed with me. Yeah, she was hard to please. But she was a very hard worker, and was the brain behind our business, my father's business. So she was effective in that way.
In what way did that influence you, that lack of contact with her?
Well, I think I didn't get proper mothering. I didn't feel good about myself, didn't feel loved, and it took a great many years to kind of work that through. Lots of it, perhaps, maybe became the function of my wife, Marilyn, who I met when I was about 15. And we've been pretty inseparable since then.
The most important figure in your memoir, I think, is your wife, Marilyn.
Oh, no, without a doubt.
And you didn't have a mentor when you were young.
No.
But in fact, Marilyn helped you to become yourself, in fact.
I think she did. I was already a little bit on that way in that I was a very avid reader. I was reading good literature at a very early age, going to the library. But Marilyn was the first person I met who was like me in that regard. So we were both readers and students and enjoyed all the English courses and books that all the other students hated. So I found a kinsperson there.
And that was the love for life.
Yes.
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 U vreme kada je medicina preuzimala primat nad ljudskom dušom, Jalom kritički koristi ono što je vredno iz psihijatrije i psihoanalize, ali uključuje i samog sebe, to jest ličnost terapeuta u terapeutski proces. Njegovi pacijenti najčešće nisu osobe sa mentalnim poremećajima, već ljudi koji nose čudovišno breme patnje, a ne znaju kako da uče iz sopstvenog iskustva. Knjige Teorija i praksa grupne psihoterapije i egzistencijalna psihoanaliza izučavaju se na fakultetima širom sveta i već dugo važe i kao najbolji udžbenici za profesionalne terapeute.
At the time you started out, psychoanalysis had, I think, strict and rigid rules. And you decided not to stick to those rules and to go your own way.
I felt I saw lots of limits in psychoanalysis. I had a personal experience in psychoanalysis when I first went into the field of psychiatry, as a resident in psychiatry. We go to medical school for 4 years, then a year internship where you do medicine and surgery and everything else, and then 3 years of psychiatry. That's how we become a psychiatrist. So I went into psychoanalysis, as many people were expected to do, for 700 hours, 4 times a week for 3 years. And I didn't feel the process helped me. I didn't think it was a very good model for treatment. I think the most important thing I learned in my analysis was this is a very bad model for treatment.
So you choose to do an orthodox psychotherapy.
Well, it wasn't entirely unorthodox. I mean, there were American psychiatry was adding to the Freudian ideas, where we have to look at not only our experiences with parents and early in life, but also look at the way we relate to people all through our life cycle. And so that was a very important issue for me. I began to look at how people relate to one another. That's why I began to like group therapy, because we learn a lot about our relationships, not just with our early figures, but with our current figures and with our spouses and people we worked with. So I took that very seriously and did a lot of group therapy at the beginning, from the very beginning of my training.
In this space, you have been practicing psychoanalysis for decades.
Here, yes.
So this is normally your place. So excuse me for taking your place, but...
Right.
So your approach was quite new. You focus on the individual needs of each patient.
Well, I did a lot of experimentation, got a lot of feedback from patients. And as I say, I drew from lots of other theoreticians, people who contribute to, in addition to Freud, there are so many others that I really enjoyed. European contributors like Karen Horney and Eric Fromm, and Americans like Carl Rogers and Harry Stack Sullivan and Rollo May. So these are all the people that I drew from.
You tend to be active, personally engaged, and focus on here and now.
Right.
In fact,
I do that probably almost every session. I'll ask some kind of question about how are you and I doing here today? How would you look at this? Is this what you were hoping for? When were we seemingly closer? When were we further apart? I'll try to work on the here and now because I think that helps work on the relationship.
You write in your memoir that a therapy session is a deep and authentic meeting between two people.
Yes.
And you call it the island of intimacy. So let's talk about that intimacy.
I think, for one thing, the patient shares everything over time. There are very few things that are held back. And I'd like to know even what those things are that are held back. It's a place where you have a total confidence. And as we go through life, there's not many total confidants that we are. I always ask people, do you have someone who's a total confidant? Most people will say there's one or two or three people who really know everything about me. If people say there's no one that knows everything about me, I'm a little concerned about that. I'd like them to be able to develop some really close, intimate relationships. And I do tend to reveal my feelings at times too. So I'm not at all afraid of revealing myself and what I'm feeling during this hour as well.
But okay, the patient, he has to dig deep inside of himself. Mm-hmm. But how much should you reveal of yourself?
Well, that's a big question, really. I don't reveal everything about myself. I reveal things about myself that I think will be useful to the patient, because that's what I'm here for. But I've gone through a long evolution of that, because when I began the field, therapists revealed nothing about themselves, and that was the training that we had. But I felt that it was better for us to begin to reveal more about ourselves. One of the first things early books that I wrote was a book with the patient where we each wrote a summary. I don't know if that's in Serbian or not, is it?
Yeah.
In English, it's called Every Day Gets a Little Closer.
Yes, it's translated, yeah.
It's a crazy title. It has to do with a song that she liked very much. Anyway, we each wrote a summary of the session from our standpoint, and then after several weeks, we exchanged them. She saw what I wrote, I saw. So that was sort of major revealing. It was a kind of a daring thing to do in my field. So I began doing a lot more self-revelation than most therapists do. And almost without exception, each time I've told something about myself, I think it's been for the benefit of the patient.
When we're talking about intimacy, where is the boundary between intimacy and seduction?
Well, the boundary between intimacy and seduction. Well, I'm there to help the patient love themselves, not to love me. I'm there to help the patient to grow and become whole again. So everything I say is pointed in that direction, not towards them falling in love with me or my being seductive to them.
Bacivši torbu na pod, Irene se srušila u fotelju.
Rekla sam ti da sam posle bratovljeve smrti svoje veze s muškarcima uvek završavala na isti način.
Kako? Kaži mi ponovo.
Oni bi imali neku nezgodu, neki problem, možda bi se razboleli, a ja bih onda postala odvratna i odstranila ih iz svog života. Brzim hiruškim rezom. Moji rezovi su čisti.
Zato što bi poredila njihov problem sa težinom gubitka Alena. Zbog toga bi postala ogorčena.
Uglavnom je bilo zbog toga, sigurna sam. I zato što sam htela da mi nešto znače. Nisam htela da slušam o njihovim bednim problemima.
A šta je sa mnom danas?
Crveni signal, bes. Htela sam da te gađam nečim.
Zato što si osjećala kao da poredim svoj gubitak s tvojim?
Da. A onda sam pomislila da ćeš, kad završimo sesiju, pokupiti svoj gubitak i poneti ga niz svoju baštensku stazicu do tvoje ženice koja će te čekati zajedno sa ostatkom vašeg urednog ušuškanog života. Tada mi se pali crveni signal.
I like very much your tales, the tales about your patients.
Mm-hmm.
And in The Mama and the Meaning of Life, there is a tale about Irene, your patient who couldn't overcome the grief after her husband died.
I think that's one of the best teaching stories I've written. This was a woman who had lost her husband and was angry. He was young. He was in terrific health until he got this cancer, and she was not happy about life and about herself. But she taught me a great deal about therapy. But she had a lot of anger at me for being alive and having a spouse that was alive, and for my going ahead in my comfortable life and nothing bad happening to me. And so she uttered all these things. It was hard to take, but I tried to stay with her. And it ended up, after a long time, being a very good course of therapy. And I called it, 7 important lessons that she taught to me about the therapy of grief. Yeah,
it's possible to cure grief?
There's no quick cure to grief. It's all the people that I saw who lost a spouse, it was about a 2-year process, really. First year, it was awfully hard for some people, especially the big days, the birthday of the spouse, or the Christmas, or the first Easter without the spouse. And the second year, they cycled through it again, and by then it was much better. Also much more difficult, I think, for women than for a lot of the men in our study. Soon paired up rather quickly, and I think they didn't do the full work of grief. There's a statement. It's in English. It may not be translatable, but they didn't get better repair because they repaired. They met someone else and paired up again with them, and I think that was quite true.
I like very much how you describe your sessions. Mm-hmm. They look like real fights.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There is an intensity between you two.
Right.
It's a kind of intensity we see amongst couples.
Right. There were real struggles that I had with her. Once I remember I told her that I was thinking of canceling our session today because my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, had died, and I was going off to Washington in the plane in a couple of hours. She got furious at me. If I can come to see you when my husband's just died, you can come to see me. She was a high-spirited woman. I still see her once in a while.
Izabravši za svoja istraživanja stanje ljudske duše, poput samoće, besmisla, straha od smrti i potrebe za slobodom, Jalom prikuplja izuzetan materijal za pisanje. Naslov Jedan dan svedoči o značaju svakodnevice i njenog govora za otkrivanje smisla života, što je i naslov jedne od njegovih kultnih knjiga. Svojim stilom pisanja kreće se između kliničke prakse, filozofije i dramske priče. Tako nastaju naslovi Ležanje na kauču, Gledanje u sunce, Čari, psihoterapije.
The whole life you were in love with literature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at what moment you started writing? What was the moment of transition?
Well, that was a big step. I took off for a sabbatical for a year, and the first stop really was Bali, and we rented a house there, and we were there for some months, and all I had with me was my case notes of many patients. I think I took notes of about 40 patients, and I just just waited until one of them sort of drifted into my mind and started writing that story. It was a wonderful experience to write those 10 stories in that book, Love's Executioner. That was some of the most fun I've ever had. I liked writing those books. I worked hard on the professional books and spent many years, but I greatly enjoyed writing the novels. Nietzsche novel was a great experience in my life.
You wrote about 3 great philosophers. You write 3 novels, in fact, 3 psychobiographies about Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and Spinoza.
Well, when I was in my early training, a book came out that was very important. It was a book by an American psychologist named Rollo May. I don't know how well he is known in Europe, but he was a very important person. He wrote a book called Existence, and it made me feel that the idea of thinking that psychiatry started in the 1890s with Freud, and that was the beginning of it, is all wrong, because great thinkers have been thinking the thoughts about death and how we live life and how we attain happiness and how we relate to people and how we love and for thousands of years. So I thought it was necessary to draw on these. And after Rollo May's book came out, I began feeling that even more strongly. And then I decided that I'll choose the ones that have most relevance to psychotherapy. And the Nietzsche was clear. I mean, I had a fantasy. What would it be like? Because Nietzsche lived near about the same time Freud did. What would it be like if Nietzsche we had a psychiatry based on him rather than on Freud? And that was one of the thoughts I had about this novel. What if somehow he had come into Freud's confidence at that point?
But in fact, Freud, he took a lot of Nietzsche.
He did. He never acknowledged that, but he did. He leaned on Nietzsche. I wanted to have a meeting between Nietzsche and Freud. It would have been perfect. But when Nietzsche was in his prime, Freud was still a medical student. And when Freud was in psychiatry, Nietzsche had developed a brain disease and was demented at that time. So the timing wasn't right. So what I did was have Freud meet Nietzsche's teacher, Breuer, and they had this meeting. If I could have had a difference in time, I would have had Nietzsche and Freud together.
Jozefe, dužnost I vernost su prevara, zavese iza kojih se možemo sakriti. Samo oslobađanje znači jedno, sve to ne, čak I dužnosti. Breuer je zorio Nietzsche uplašen. Vi želite da postanete ono što jeste, nastavi Nietzsche. Koliko često sam vas čuo da to govorite? Koliko često ste se žalili što nikada niste upoznali svoju slobodu? Vaša dobrota, vaša dužnost, vaša vernost, rešetke su vašeg zatvora. Uvenut ćete od tako malih vrlina. Morate naučiti da upoznate zlo u sebi. Ne možete biti delimično slobodni. I vaši instinkti su žedni slobode. Vaši divlji psi u podrumu, oni laju za slobodom. Oslušnite pažljivije, zar ih ne čujete?
They are quite different, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer and Spinoza, but what they have in common is that they lived a kind of solitary lives and they were dedicated to their ideas.
They were dedicated absolutely to their ideas.
But could that dedication lead to insanity?
Well, it tells me they had good ideas, but they could have each been helped by therapy. You know, I would have hoped that Nietzsche could have gotten into therapy with Freud and been helped. But I got him into therapy with Breuer. It was a type of therapy.
Is solitude good for artists, for philosophers?
Well, I think some degree of solitude probably is really necessary, but some of them were quite loquacious. Socrates, to pick one example, and Plato, and many of the Greeks were very social. But you do need solitude, and sometimes a lot of them were unmarried.
There is Schopenhauer's parable, which illustrates the human relationship. Mm-hmm. So when it's cold, porcupines, they get close for warmth, but as they get close, they begin to prick one another with their quills and then they have to move away,
Right.
and then go again closer,
Yeah.
until they discover the right distance.
That's right.
So, what's the right distance between people?
Well, that's Schopenhauer's view. I think people can be very close to one another. I'm very bonded to my wife and to my children, and that's what I do in group therapy. It's what I do in individual therapy. I think that a loving, close relationship with another person is so important for the life satisfaction and fulfillment of people. So I do work very much on interpersonal relationships and how people relate. And I feel sad for the people who are so isolated and do a lot on breaking through isolation.
Do you have some good advice for people how to live closer?
Accurate empathy is just one of the major, really sort of lodestones of psychiatry. It's a founding stone. We have to begin to understand how others feel and where they're coming from, and maybe they've been hurt or scarred by their parents. We have to keep that in mind. So Carl Rogers, who was one of the early psychologists, he outlined some important dimensions for therapy, for a therapist, and one was accurate empathy. Another was genuineness, and another was positive, unconditional regard for the patient. Those three things hold up still now after thousands of research studies.
Život okovan fantazijama o ljubavi za Jaloma je, kao i za Freuda, izvor žestoke ljutnje. Živeti od iluzija, sanjarija i životnih laži za njega je vrsta smrti. Zato romantičnu ljubav posmatra kao simptom koje treba lečiti, nasuprot većini kultura koje je tretiraju kao iskustvo koje hrani naše živote do smrti. Tako ispisuje rečenicu: "Ne volim da radim sa pacijentima koji su zaljubljeni, jer je romantična ljubav podržana misterijom i raspada se pred analizom. Ne sviđa mi se da budem krvnik ljubavi."
You say that love and psychotherapy are not really compatible. Why?
Of course, I'm talking about romantic love. And romantic love, if people are in a romantic love, they may not be seeing the person very, very accurately. They put their love into the person. It's a kind of spell that they're into. It never lasts. It always ends at some point and maybe moves over and transformed into another kind of love, where you're in love with that person as they exist, not as you idealize them in a way.
But do you think that love is not a real problem for a therapist?
It's not a real problem. Well, there's a kind of love that goes on between therapists and patients, the love for the being of the other person. So it's a kind of love. But romantic, erotic love is something that it's very hard to work with in therapy.
So you deal with existential therapy. It means the problems of death, isolation, freedom, and meaning.
Yeah.
And what's the primary source of anxiety today?
Who you're seeing, who you're working with. People have anxiety about so many different things. If you speak in a general way about all mankind, I'm sure you'd have to say that it had to do, with death, with the fact that we're finite, and somewhere in our mind we know that we're going to die, and we learn about that early in life. In our culture, we learn about that sometimes at 5 or 6, or when a grandparent dies, or the first funeral, or when we see a pet die, or the leaves dying as they're falling from the trees. They begin to suddenly realize at some point in their lives, it could be when they're 10, could be when they're 12, and this is going to happen to me too. Everybody dies. And that's a terrible shock. And they have to figure out how to deal with that. And the parents will tell them, yes, but then you'll go somewhere else, you'll go to heaven or so, and that's a way of assuaging that fear.
Yes, but how to overcome that fear? of death?
Well, it's hard. I've worked on that for a long time. I knew when I wrote that book on existential therapy that was going to be the major thing that I had to work with. It's hard to talk to people about death, and I couldn't do it very well. I didn't know how to do it at that point. And I started working with people who had to talk about death because they had some fatal illness. So for 10 years, I worked a lot with cancer patients, led groups of cancer patients. That had never been done before. It's first groups really that existed where everybody in the group had cancer and knew they were going to die, but they offered themselves a great deal of support. So I learned from that how to work with people who are dying, how to offer them some sort of support. I think one important factor in that has got to do with regrets. I think people who have not lived a very full life approach death with a great deal more fear.
That's how you teach them how to live, in fact. Right. That's the more important thing, to teach them.
That's certainly
regret-free life.
That's certainly something, to live your life fully while you're alive. You know, while you have a life, to live it as fully as you can. And also I think that isolation makes dying a lot more difficult, to be so cut off from everyone. And it's so much better to be in contact with people. And many of the great writers have written about that. All these things that I'm talking about in existential approaches are all things that you find in the great writers, in Dickens and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. They knew about these things. That's why I often go back and read them.
At the end, let's go back to your memoir, Becoming Myself.
Sure.
So I have impression that your therapeutical work was a kind of substitute for life, in a way.
You know, I've got 4 children and 7 grandchildren, and I'm very closely involved and engaged with them. They're all around here, and I see them all the time. And I got a ton of friends that I'm seeing all the time. No, I don't think that's quite true. So I have a very loving relationship with my wife. So I don't think it's a substitute for life. I think it's something that I draw on my full life experience to begin to be helpful to people.
Yes. But was that book a kind of therapeutical work on yourself?
I don't know. It may have been in part. It certainly helped me get my life more clearly in front of me.
And for the end, for the real end, please tell me, who is Irvin Yalom at the end of the book? What did he become?
Becoming who I am. Well, you see me right now.
Yeah. So who are you?
Right now.
Who did you become? So.
Who am I? I'm a loving husband and a father and a grandfather, and I've got lots of friends, and I'm a fulfilled person, I think. I think I've used all the potential that I had. I don't feel there's undone things that in my life.